After ship lost oxygen, only human dared save alien children. Jake Torres floated in the dark, the silence of the dying starliner pressing against his eardrums like a physical weight. His oxygen gauge blinked red. 90 minutes, maybe less if he exerted himself. The celestial harmony was a tomb now, its luxury corridors choked with debris and the acrid stink of burnt circuitry. Every other survivor had already evacuated. The rescue ships were gone. Jake had his escape pod. He had his ticket out. Then he heard it, a child's cry, high and terrified, echoing through the ventilation shaft above his head. His hand froze on the pod's hatch release. The sound came again. Not one voice, but several. Children, plural. Somewhere in this labyrinth of twisted metal and dying systems, kids were trapped and alone. Jake's throat tightened. He stared at the pod's open door, at the promise of survival it offered. 90 minutes of air. That was enough to seal himself in, trigger the launch sequence, and let the autopilot carry him to the nearest station. He'd done harder things. He'd survived worse. The crying didn't stop. His daughter's face flashed behind his eyes. Emma, 3 years dead in a shuttle accident he couldn't prevent, couldn't fix, couldn't undo. He'd promised himself he'd never feel that helpless again. He'd buried that pain under salvage work and isolation, keeping his head down, his heart locked away. But those cries, God, those cries. Jake's hand fell away from the pod hatch. He grabbed his salvage kit, cutting torch, mag clamps, emergency sealant, and kicked off toward the ventilation shaft. His oxygen gauge ticked down. 89 minutes. This is insane, he muttered to himself, prying open the vent cover with a crowbar. You're going to die in here, Torres. But he couldn't leave them. Not again. The celestial harmony had been the pride of the luxury Starliner fleet, a floating palace designed to showcase interspecies cooperation. 3,000 passengers from a dozen worlds, all traveling together in what the brochures called unprecedented harmony. Then a meteor strike had shredded the hull and killed the life support in a cascade failure that gave the crew exactly 11 minutes to evacuate. 11 minutes. Species-segregated protocols. The Velusian nursery wing, built with its own high-pressure atmosphere system, had been at the bottom of the evacuation priority list. By the time anyone got to it, the rescue ships were already overloaded. Adults first. That was the protocol. That was always the protocol. He hauled himself through the vent shaft, his muscles burning as he fought against zero gravity and his own exhaustion. The children's voices grew louder, more distinct. He could hear words now, Velusian, a language he didn't speak. But the terror in their tone needed no translation. The nursery door was sealed, its emergency lockdown still active. Jake's cutting torch flared to life, spitting white-hot plasma. The metal began to glow, to peel away. His oxygen gauge dropped faster. 73 minutes. The exertion was eating through his reserves. The door gave way with a shriek of tortured metal. Jake shoved through, and a jagged piece of shrapnel caught his forearm, opening a deep gash that immediately began leaking blood into his suit. He hissed through his teeth but didn't stop. Inside, 5 Velusian children huddled together in the corner. Their skin, delicate, crystalline, faintly luminescent, showed stress fractures like cracks in glass. Oxygen deprivation. Their biology was nitrogen-based. Human air was toxic to them long-term, but it would keep them alive short-term. Now that was something. That was a chance. An elderly Velusian, their caretaker, lay slumped against the wall. Kirath, according to the name badge, too weak to move, maybe dying. The old alien's eyes met Jake's, and even across the species divide, the gratitude was unmistakable. Okay, Jake said, forcing his voice to stay calm. Okay, kids, I'm here. You're going to be fine. They didn't understand his words, but they understood his tone. One of them, a little girl with violet-tinted skin, reached out a trembling hand. Jake took it. Her fingers were cold. Too cold. He worked fast, his salvage training kicking in. The nursery's atmosphere recycler was damaged but not dead. He jury-rigged a connection to his own rebreather, creating a makeshift bubble that would feed the kids a breathable mix. It wasn't perfect. It wouldn't last long. But it would buy them time. The cost was immediate. His oxygen reserves plummeted. 32 minutes. Jake activated his emergency beacon, the distress signal screaming out into the void. Someone would come. They had to. He just had to keep these kids calm and breathing until they did. He sat down against the wall, pulling the children close. They clustered around him, their small bodies trembling. Jake started talking, stories, anything to distract them. He told them about Earth, about oceans and rain, about his daughter and the games they used to play. His vision started to blur, hypoxia creeping in. 21 minutes. The little girl with violet skin pressed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. Her eyes were wide, luminous with bioluminescence. "It's okay," Jake whispered. "Someone's coming. You're going to be okay." He believed it. He had to, even if he wouldn't be there to see it. Just as Jake's world was fading to a pinpoint of light, a new sound cut through the silence. The resonant thud of magnetic clamps locking onto the hull. A rescue craft. Sleek, powerful, and private. It dwarfed the standard-issue lifeboats. The airlock hissed open and a medical team swarmed in, followed by a figure who moved with an authority that commanded the chaos. She was Velusian, tall and regal, her crystalline skin shimmering even in the dim emergency light. This was Ambassador Valora Chess, a member of the Sovereign Council. She had been searching for her own children, Mira and Sen. Her composed exterior shattered the moment she saw the nursery. First came a wave of pure, unadulterated relief as her eyes found her two children, alive. Then came the shock. Huddled with them was a human, his suit alarms shrieking a symphony of failure, a bloody gash on his arm crudely sealed with suit patch. The moment the med team secured the last child, Jake's body gave out. He collapsed, his helmet clattering against the deck. Valora was at his side in an instant, pushing a medic aside. She tore off his helmet and pressed an emergency oxygen mask to his face. Her crystalline hands, which could sense the delicate bioelectric fields of living beings, pressed against his temples. She felt it all. The ragged, shallow thread of his life force, flickering on the edge of oblivion. And beneath it, a tidal wave of grief. Fragmented, agonizing memories of a little girl's laughter, of a shuttle accident, of a loss so profound it had hollowed him out completely. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why would you do this for them?" Jake's eyes fluttered, seeing nothing. His voice was a dry rasp, barely audible. "Couldn't leave them," he murmured. "Not again." He was rushed to her ship's advanced medical bay. As her team worked to stabilize him, Valora ran his profile. The readout was bleak. Jake Torres. No registered family, no permanent address. Just a salvage license and a mountain of official demerits balanced by a single, crushing commendation. Survivor of the shuttle disaster that claimed his daughter. Valora looked from the data slate to the unconscious man who had traded his life for her children's. She would not let this act go unrewarded. And a cold certainty began to form in her mind. The accident that had crippled the celestial harmony, the one that had left her children to die, was no accident at all. Jake woke to the scent of something like ozone and rain-washed stone. The shrill alarms were gone, replaced by a soft, ambient hum. He wasn't in the wreckage anymore. He was in a medical suite so advanced it felt more like a luxury stateroom, the walls glowing with a gentle, pearlescent light. Ambassador Valora was there watching him. Beside her stood two small Velusian children, their crystalline skin shimmering with nervous energy. Her children, Mira and Sen. The smaller of the two, Mira, shyly stepped forward, holding out a small, intricately carved crystal that pulsed with a faint inner light. It was a traditional Velusian gratitude token, a family heirloom. Valora's voice was calm but layered with a steely resolve. "The celestial harmony disaster is now a political weapon," she explained. "My enemies are spinning this as Velusian incompetence to sabotage the Unity Accord, a treaty that would finally grant your species a seat on the Sovereign Council." Her eyes hardened. "I am convinced the life support failure was no accident. It was an assassination attempt, targeting my family." She needed someone she could trust absolutely, someone outside the viper's nest of Velusian politics, someone her children already looked to for safety. "I am offering you a position, Mr. Torres," she said, the formality a thin veil over her urgency. personal guardian to Mira and Sen, and my chief security consultant. The offer hung in the air, a full pardon for his past, Volusian citizenship, resources beyond his wildest dreams. But more than that, she was offering him a purpose. Jake was floored. A bodyguard? He was a washed-up salvage pilot with a ghost he couldn't outrun. He looked at his hands, at the fresh scar tissue on his arm. He started to protest, to tell her she had the wrong man. But then Mira, the little girl, reached out and took his scarred hand in her small, cool one. Her touch was gentle, her voice a quiet chime. "You're sad like us," she said, her large, dark eyes meeting his. "Daddy went away too, but you stayed." The words struck him with the force of a plasma blast, cracking through the walls he'd built around his heart. He looked from her face to her brother's, and then to Valora. He couldn't refuse. He wouldn't. Valora's hand rested on his shoulder, a brief, affirming pressure. Through the contact, she felt his weary resignation melt into a flicker of acceptance, a fragile spark of hope. And somewhere, deep beneath the grief and duty, she felt something else stir, a warmth that neither of them was ready to name. "I accept," Jake said, his voice raspy but firm. He wasn't just taking a job. He was answering a call he thought he'd never hear again. Jake's new home was a city carved from crystal, humming with an energy that vibrated in his bones. Valora's estate was a sprawling palace of glowing spires and gardens, where the plants themselves provided the light. He felt like a stray dog in a museum, his boots too loud on the polished floors, his blunt human warmth a stark contrast to the Volusians' refined touch-based communication. He was a fish out of water, and he knew it. But Mira and Sen didn't seem to care. They adored him. He taught them human games, chasing them through the gardens in a chaotic round of tag that left them giggling, their crystalline forms shimmering with delight. In return, they taught him their language. A small hand on his, and concepts, words, and emotions would flow into his mind. A gentle, intimate transfer of knowledge that felt more real than any spoken word. A genuine bond was forming, fragile but fierce. The games ended when Valora summoned him to her private study. The investigation files were spread across a holographic table. "The sabotage was a virus," she explained, her voice tight, "uploaded during a routine maintenance cycle. The only engineers with access were all Volusian." Jake leaned over the console, his eyes scanning the lines of complex code. The politician in Valora saw a Volusian problem. The soldier in Jake saw something else, a flicker of familiarity in the virus's architecture, a specific, brutal efficiency he remembered from his military days. "This isn't Volusian," he said, tapping a section of the code. "The signature, it's a style used by Terran Black Sun operatives, mercenaries." He looked up, his gaze locking with hers. This wasn't just sabotage. Someone hired outside help and framed your people to stoke anti-Volusian sentiment? The revelation landed with a sickening thud. Together they dug deeper, uncovering a disturbing pattern. 3 other accidents in the past year, all targeting delegates who, like Valora, were champions of the Unity Accord. Her mentor, the venerable counselor Thrain, even sent a private message, warning her to be cautious, that her investigation was making powerful enemies. That night, unable to sleep, Jake patrolled the estate's perimeter. He found Valora in the gardens, standing alone under the softly pulsing, bioluminescent trees. She looked exhausted, the weight of the galaxy on her shoulders. "You're not like other humans," she said, her voice barely a whisper in the quiet. She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to rest on his. Through her touch, he felt her sincerity, her pain, and something else. A growing awareness of him, not as a guard, but as a man. "You feel brighter." The air crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with the alien flora around them. The attraction was a physical thing, a silent, powerful current pulling them together. And though neither of them moved, both knew that a line had just been crossed. The procession moved through the crystalline canyons of the capital, a river of polished chrome and diplomatic banners. It was a show of force, a public declaration that Valora would not be intimidated. She was on her way to the council chambers to present the evidence that would secure the Unity Accord. Jake, riding in the lead escort vehicle, scanned the crowds, his hand never far from the pulse pistol concealed under his jacket. The air felt too quiet, too still. Then the world exploded. A concussive blast ripped through the convoy, flipping the vehicle behind them. From the rooftops, hulking reptilian figures descended on grav lifts, draconian mercenaries armed for war. Chaos erupted, panic. Plasma bolts hissed through the air, melting crystal and steel. Their target was obvious, Valora's central transport. Jake didn't think. He acted. He threw open the door to her vehicle, yanked Mira and Sen from their seats, and shoved them into the reinforced safe compartment under the floorboards. "Stay down! Don't make a sound!" he roared over the din. He slammed the hatch shut, snatched a plasma rifle from a fallen Volusian guard, and vaulted over the smoldering wreckage. This was his element, not the pristine halls of diplomacy, but the brutal geometry of a firefight. He wasn't a bodyguard, he was a survivor. He used the twisted metal of the convoy as cover, turning the ambush site into his own personal maze. A mercenary rounded a corner, and Jake dropped him with a precise shot to the chest. He saw two more pinning down the other guards. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a scrapper. He ripped a power conduit from a damaged vehicle and kicked it into a pool of spilled coolant. The resulting electrical explosion sent the mercs flying. A searing pain tore across his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back as he saw the scorch mark on his tactical vest. A plasma burn. He ignored the fire spreading through his side and laid down suppressing fire, buying precious seconds. Sirens wailed in the distance. Reinforcements. One of the Draconians, wounded and limping, broke from the fight, trying to escape into the alleys. Jake surged forward, ignoring the agony in his side, and tackled him in a spray of gravel and debris. He pressed the rifle to the creature's throat. "Who hired you? Talk!" The mercenary just laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "You're protecting the wrong side, human," he hissed, blood bubbling on his lips. "The Accord dies, and so does she." Before Jake could react, the mercenary's eyes went wide and he convulsed. A suicide implant. He went limp. The fight was over. Velusian security forces swarmed the area. Jake slumped against the wall, rifle clattering to the ground, his hand pressed against the blistering wound on his ribs. The safe hatch on Valora's vehicle opened. She emerged shaken but untouched, her eyes scanning the carnage until they found him. She rushed to his side, her regal composure shattered. "Jake!" Her crystalline hands, glowing with a faint inner light, hovered over his injury. He could feel her bioelectric sense washing over him, assessing the damage. A cool wave against the fire. "You could have run," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You should have saved yourself." Jake's gaze shifted past her, to the two small, terrified faces of Mira and Sen peering out from the vehicle. He met Valora's eyes, his own filled with a grim, unbreakable resolve. "They're my job now," he rasped through the pain. "I don't run from that." In that moment, Valora saw it all. This wasn't duty. It wasn't a contract. It was something absolute. And the gratitude she felt for the man who had saved her children transformed, deepening into something far more profound. Something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. The estate felt less like a home and more like a fortress. Guards patrolled the crystalline gardens, their plasma rifles held at a low ready. Back in the command center, Jake and Valora pieced together the fragments of the ambush. The mercenaries' weapons were Terran-made, but the serial numbers led them down a rabbit hole of shell corporations. At the bottom was a name, Vosk Industries, a mega conglomerate that built ships, sold arms, and profited from the reconstruction that always followed a war. Its CEO, Corvin Vosk, was a ruthless Volusian oligarch who had publicly praised the Unity Accord. Another revelation arrived with a ghost, a man named Lyran, a former spy and a friend of Valora's late husband, materialized from the shadows of the garden. He didn't speak. He simply placed a data chip on the table. The contents were sickeningly clear. Encrypted comms, financial transfers, mission directives. Voska hadn't just funded the ambush. He had orchestrated the celestial harmony sabotage from the beginning. It was a targeted assassination attempt to kill Valora and her children, frame humanity, and shatter the Accord. The ratification vote was in 5 days. If it failed, decades of peace would crumble, and a war Vosk stood to make trillions from would become inevitable. But the data chip held one more poison pill, a list of Vosk's paid informants inside the council. At the top of the list was a name that made Valora gasp, a choked, wounded sound. Counselor Thrain, her mentor, the man who had held her when her husband died. He had been feeding Vosk her every move. The news shattered her. The regal diplomat crumbled, her shoulders shaking with silent, telepathic sobs of betrayal. Jake, now wearing a sleek black tactical suit the Volusian armorers had custom fitted to his human biology, moved to her side. He saw her despair, the sheer weight of being betrayed by a man she considered family. He knelt and took her hands in his. They were cold as ice. For the first time, she dropped her shields completely, letting him feel the raw, unfiltered storm inside her, the crushing grief, the paralyzing fear, and beneath it all, a fierce, growing love for him. He held her gaze, his own resolve hardening into steel. "We finish this together," he said, his voice low and certain. "For your kids, for our kids." The word hung in the air between them, a promise spoken and accepted in the silent language of their shared gaze. This was no longer her fight. It was theirs. The plan was insane, and it was their only shot. Jake stood beside Valora in the shimmering expanse of the Volusian Crystal Amphitheater, the site of a grand gala for the Unity Accord. Beneath their formal attire, they both wore concealed armor. Across the hall, Counselor Thrain mingled, the picture of a respected elder statesman, a viper in their midst. Jake fed the false intel through a secure channel, a critical witness waiting in the wings. Thrain took the bait. A subtle signal from his comm cuff was all it took. Suddenly, Jake and Valora were on the stage with him, a spotlight finding them. "You sold us out," Valora's voice boomed, amplified across the silent hall as Jake hit the broadcast switch, sending Thrain's private comms live to every screen in the room. "You sold peace for profit." Panic flashed in Thrain's eyes. He gave the signal. The glass walls of the amphitheater exploded inward as Vosk's mercenaries stormed the gala. But they didn't find terrified children. They found shimmering, holographic decoys of Mira and Sen that flickered and died under their fire. The real ambush was sprung. From the shadows, Lyran's team emerged, backed by loyal Volusian guard, their plasma fire precise and overwhelming. But Jake's eyes weren't on the mercenaries. They were on the back exit, where a single figure was trying to slip away. Corvin Vosk. Jake charged, tackling him into a service corridor. The fight was brutal. Vosk wasn't just an oligarch, he was a walking weapon, his body laced with illegal cybernetics. A fist like a pile driver slammed into Jake's ribs, cracking them. Jake was outmatched, fighting on pure grit, when Valora appeared. Her hands glowed with bioelectric energy as she slammed her palms against Vosk's chest. The air crackled. Vosk screamed as his implants short-circuited, his metal limbs seizing. Together, they forced him to the ground. "This ends now," Jake growled, holding him down. Valora knelt, placing her hand on Vosk's temple. It wasn't a gentle touch. It was an invasion, a Volusian truth touch that ripped a confession from his mind, broadcasting his raw thoughts of sabotage, murder, and greed to the entire galaxy. The evidence wasn't just damning, it was absolute. The galaxy saw it all. The confession, ripped raw from Vosk's mind, played on a loop across every news feed from Terra to the Outer Rim. The footage of Thrain's treachery, his face contorted in panic, became the symbol of a conspiracy broken. Within hours, the Separation League collapsed under the weight of scandal. Vosk and Thrain were arrested, their assets seized. The Unity Accord, once a point of fierce debate, was fast-tracked and passed with a unanimous vote. Humans were granted their seat on the Sovereign Council. Valora was hailed as a hero, the savior of the peace. But the hero of the hour was nowhere to be seen. Jake found her in the private gardens of her estate, a place he now knew well. She was standing alone beneath the softly pulsing light of the crystalline trees, the weight of the galaxy seemingly on her shoulders. "I failed to see it," she said, her voice barely a whisper as he approached. "Thrain. He was like a father to me. I trusted him." Jake came to a stop beside her, the scent of alien blossoms hanging in the cool air. "You trusted someone you loved," he said, his voice low and rough. "That's not failure. That's being alive." She turned to him, her large, dark eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She reached out and touched his face, her cool, crystalline fingers tracing the line of his jaw. For the first time, her telepathic shields didn't just lower, they vanished. He was flooded with everything: the crushing grief for her late husband, the fierce primal love for her children, the sting of betrayal, and beneath it all, a current of emotion so powerful it took his breath away. A fierce, undeniable love for him. "You gave me back my purpose," he said, his own voice thick with emotion. "Let me give you mine." He leaned in and kissed her. It was a collision of worlds. His human warmth against her cool skin, his raw passion met with a wave of telepathic sensation that was more intimate than any touch he had ever known. He felt her joy, her relief, her desire, all of it washing over him. In response to his kiss, a soft, bioluminescent light bloomed across her skin, tracing patterns from her cheeks down her neck, a silent answer to his own unspoken feelings. Later, they sat together on a stone bench, wrapped in each other's arms in the quiet hum of the garden. "My people will question this," she murmured, her head resting against his chest. "A human, in my life, in my children's lives." Jake looked out at the glowing trees, a small smile on his face. He tightened his arm around her. "Let them question," he said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." A soft sound, like the chime of tiny bells, escaped her. It was a laugh. And for the first time in years, Valora's chest felt completely, entirely whole. The victory felt fragile, like a thin sheet of ice over a dark ocean. 2 days before the official accord signing ceremony, a sense of peace had finally settled over the estate. But as Jake stood with Valora, watching Mira and Sen play in the gardens, he couldn't shake the feeling that it was too easy. His gut was right. The calm shattered when Lyran burst in, his normally composed face a mask of grim urgency. The news was a gut punch. Corvin Vosk had escaped. A coordinated breakout during a prisoner transfer, funded by the last dregs of his corporate empire. But that wasn't the worst of it. Lyran threw a data chip on the table, a holographic schematic blooming in the air above it. "He's activated a failsafe," Lyran said, his voice tight. "A stolen Terran kinetic strike satellite. He's aiming it at the council chambers." The target wasn't just Valora anymore. It was everyone. The entire leadership of the new Unity Council, human and Velusian, gathered in one place for the signing. Vosk couldn't stop the Accord, so he was going to decapitate it, plunging the galaxy into the very chaos he'd always profited from. Jake's eyes narrowed on the schematic. "That's a salvage platform," he said, pointing to the remote station controlling the satellite. "Old series, class. I've worked on a dozen of them." He looked at Valora, then at Lyran. "The satellite can only be disarmed manually from that station. I'll lead an intercept team." Valora stepped forward, her hand gripping his arm. "No." The word was quiet, but held the force of a command. "He's on his way there now with a kill squad. It's a suicide mission." She looked into his eyes, her own blazing with a fire he'd never seen before. "You saved my children. You saved my people. You saved me. I am not letting you die in space." A stealth shuttle, sleek and black, sliced through the void, its engines cold. Inside, the strike team was silent. Jake, Valora, Lyran, and 4 elite Velusian commandos, their armor glowing faintly in the dim light of the cockpit. The orbital station loomed in the viewport, a skeletal ruin of rust and metal, a perfect death trap. A voice crackled over their comms, Vosk's, broadcasting on an open channel, raving, ranting about inevitable war, about the purity of profit margins. And then a new signal pulsed on their display. A timer. The satellite's final countdown had begun. 30 minutes. "We're out of time," Jake said, chambering a round into his plasma rifle. "We go now!" The airlock door exploded inward. Zero-gravity combat was pure chaos, a three-dimensional ballet of death. Mercenaries opened fire from catwalks and maintenance shafts. Jake used his mag boots to anchor himself to a bulkhead, returning fire while Valora, weightless and graceful, floated past him. A bolt of plasma streaked toward her. She raised a hand, and a wave of bioelectric energy met the blast, deflecting it into a control panel. Their teamwork was seamless. His brutal human aggression was a battering ram. Her telepathic coordination and precise energy strikes were the scalpel. He would pin a merc down with suppressing fire, and she would drift up behind them, a single touch from her glowing hand sending them into unconscious spasms. Vosk's men were dug in, but they hadn't counted on this. They hadn't counted on a washed-up human pilot and a Velusian ambassador fighting as one. They pushed forward, corridor by corridor, the timer on Jake's HUD bleeding away the seconds. Vosk's insane laughter echoing through the station's dying halls. The control room door blew inward, torn from its hinges. Corvin Vosk stood waiting, encased in a hulking, mechanized exosuit bristling with plasma cannons. "The loving couple arrives," he snarled, his voice a metallic rasp. "Too late to stop progress." He opened fire. The fight was a desperate blur of motion. Valora flowed through the chaos, her bioelectric pulses slamming into Vosk's kinetic shields, making them flicker and groan. "Jake, the joints!" she yelled telepathically, her voice a calm anchor in his mind. Jake slid under a volley of plasma, his cutting torch flaring to life. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He was a salvage pilot. He didn't fight the armor, he took it apart. He severed hydraulic lines at the knee, mag-clamped a heavy pipe to the cannon's actuator, and used his pry bar to wrench open a chest plate. They were outmatched in firepower, but their bond, forged in grief and hope, made them a single, unpredictable weapon. With a final, desperate lunge, Jake tore open the suit's power core, showering the room in sparks. But Vosk just laughed, a broken, gurgling sound. He slammed a red button on his console. "If I burn, the galaxy burns with me." A new timer flashed on the main screen, 90 seconds. A manual override. The satellite would fire unless someone physically disarmed the warhead. Valora was already at the terminal, her fingers flying, but the screen flashed red. Access denied. "It's Terran military-grade encryption," she cried out. Jake's blood ran cold. He recognized the lockout sequence, the nested subroutines. "Black Sun," he breathed. "It's old Black Sun protocol." He looked from the warhead access port to Valora. "I can do this." He raced to the port, prying it open. Vosk, slumping in his dying suit, coughed out a final taunt. "You'll never make it. You're just a salvage rat, picking through the galaxy's trash." Jake ignored him, his fingers flying over a complex series of bypass circuits. The station rocked. The timer bled down. 40 seconds. 30. His hands were shaking. Then he felt Valora's touch on his shoulder. A wave of calm washed over him, her love cutting through his panic, steadying his hands. The muscle memory from a life he thought he'd left behind took over. 20 seconds. 10. With a final roar, Jake shoved his bare hands into the wiring, grabbed the glowing detonation core, and wrenched it free. The world went white with pain as electricity seared his flesh. The timer froze at 0:01. The station fell silent. Vosk, with his last ounce of strength, raised a smoking cannon. "No!" he wheezed. But Valora was already there. She placed her hand on his helmet, and a single, precise pulse of blue energy silenced him forever. As medics rushed in, she pulled Jake into her arms, ignoring his burns. "You did it," she whispered, her voice choked with tears. "You saved everyone." Jake sagged against her, exhausted but whole. "Just doing my job." She laughed, a sound that was half sob. "Your job is to stay alive, you reckless human." Later, the accord signing ceremony proceeded without a flaw. From the front row, Jake and Valora watched history being made, her hand entwined with his scarred one, a silent public declaration of a bond that had saved them all. 8 months later, Jake Torres stood in the Velusian Council Gardens. The title on his uniform read, Chief of Interspecies Security. But the man inside was no longer just a soldier or a pilot. His salvage days were a ghost, a story he might one day tell his children. "Papa Jake!" Mira and Sen launched themselves at his legs, their laughter like chimes in the warm air. He scooped them up, one on each arm, the familiar weight a comfort he never thought he'd feel again. The old grief for the daughter he'd lost hadn't vanished. It had been transformed. its sharp edges softened into a quiet ache of memory, honored now by the fierce, protective love he felt for these two. Valora glided toward them, a serene smile on her face. Her hand rested on her gently swelling abdomen, a silent announcement that had already sent ripples of hope across the galaxy. The first human Velusian child, a living symbol of the unity accord they had all fought for. Jake gently set the children down and reached for her. His hands, scarred from plasma burns and electrical feedback, from prying open doors and disarming warheads, were careful as they rested on the new life they had created together. Scared, she murmured, her touch telepathy a soft brush against his mind. He looked from her to the children chasing bioluminescent butterflies, to the thriving, peaceful city around them. A grin touched his lips. Terrified, he admitted, but I wouldn't change a thing. The family walked together through the gardens, their silhouettes framed against the setting of a twin sun. Jake had once thought heroism meant grand gestures, saving thousands. Now he knew better. He had saved one life, then another, and in doing so, they had saved him right back.